Alright, hello and welcome to ETeeski Tutorials. You are watching the Ultimate Game Dev tutorial series. So in this episode we're going to be creating, well, I guess this is like a cardboard box kind of texture. And we're going to put this on a cube and it's going to look like a cardboard box. So you might be wondering, what is this program that you see in front of you? Well, this is GIMP. And that's kind of a weird name, but it stands for Graphic Image Manipulation Program. And I'll pull up the website right here. It's just gimp.org. I'll put a link in the description below to that. But this program is free on both PC and Mac, and that is the full version of this program. And that's one thing that makes this program very popular for creating images, because it's very capable and can do a lot of things, and it's totally free on both PC and Mac, so a lot of people can use it with no hassle at all. So one thing about this program is I feel that it's heavily modeled or inspired by Photoshop. So a lot of the things you see in this program are going to be very similar to Photoshop and probably a bunch of other 2D image creation manipulation programs that are out there. Another alternative that I've heard is pretty good is paint.net. I guess that's the name of the program, not necessarily the website. That's something that's weird and confusing about that. But the reason why I didn't choose paint.net for this tutorial series is that it's only available for PC, but that one's also free. And another program that I really like is Photoshop, and personally I use Photoshop Elements because it can do everything that I want it to do, and it's at a lower price than Photoshop Pro, or whatever they call it, Photoshop CS, whatever the Pro super expensive version is. So a lot of the things that you see in this tutorial series you should be able to take away and use in other programs as well. But in this tutorial series I'm going to be using GIMP because it's free and it's very similar to Photoshop. It doesn't have the same professional quality as Photoshop necessarily. It has a few quirks here and there, but you know, it's good enough. It'll get the job done. And you know, I've used it to create some pretty cool images like the one that you see in front of you right here. So we can definitely use this as an example to learn about how textures are made. And another really great thing about textures is that, well, if you remember from my past episodes in this series on Blender, when I was talking about how creating 3D art, a lot of times it's just a matter of what you see is what you get, and you don't have to worry about the technicalities. It's just a matter of if it looks cool, then it's going to look cool. Well, with textures, it's even more so. If it looks cool, it's going to look cool. You can even just take pictures with your digital camera. You can draw them on paper and then scan them into the computer. Or you can just go in this program and select the paintbrush tool and just scribble around, and that will be plenty good. I'm going to hit Control Z. But yeah, just with 2D textures and what we're going to be creating with GIMP, you really don't have to worry about the technicalities. You can just click around, you can try stuff out, you can scribble on stuff, you can just click on buttons. It really doesn't matter. What you see is what you get, and if you create something and it looks kind of like what you want, then awesome. And totally feel free to go around on the internet and look for other tutorials, because those are going to be super applicable to video games. Because if you find some tutorials on the internet other than these tutorials here, and they teach you how to make something, they teach you how to draw something, or you know, just create an image in this program or any other program, then awesome. It's going to teach you how to create something that looks like something that you want to create, and it doesn't have to be video games. It doesn't have to be game development. It's just creating an image, and that's all there is to it. So it's very open-ended. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started, and I am going to show you how I created this cardboard box, and hopefully this will give us an introduction of how to use GIMP. Alright, so before I move on, I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to save this. And I'm just going to save this in a folder. Let's see. I'm going to put it with my game development indoctrination, and I guess I'll create a folder, and let's see, I will name this folder GIMP files and textures, whatever. I'll just name it in there, and I'm just going to call this cardboard box 1. Cardboard box 1. And the way I saved it right there, I'm saving it as a, oh, I don't even remember what that was, .x something. I'll pull it up. All right, so let's pull up the Indoctrination folder. And then let's pull up, where was it? GIMP, files and textures. Okay, it's a .xcf, and that is a GIMP file. So if you want to open something up in GIMP so that you can edit it later, that is going to be the file type. And you can see that little icon with the little, it's pretty hard to see, but you can see that little dog. That's the symbol for GIMP. So that is something that can only be opened in GIMP. So we can export this later, and we're going to do this at the end of the episode. We can export it as a JPEG or a PNG, probably a GIF. I don't really know why you would use a GIF in this program. Probably the most common would just be a JPEG, which you might have used in the past before. Usually with most digital cameras, when you take a picture, it saves it as a .jpeg, or when you download a picture from the internet or you draw a picture, whatever, .jpegs are very common. So we're just going to use .jpegs in this tutorial series, and that's just the type of image. It's just the type of image file that we're going to be using. So let's go ahead and start fresh. I'm going to go to File, New, and I'm going to create everything right here again. So, so let's see. I guess we can choose a template. There's a couple of different templates we can do, but honestly, I don't really ever do that. I like to just pick a size based on video game textures. Now, this is one thing when it does come to video games, is that it's good to have a square image. Especially with Unity. Sometimes you can get away with having images that aren't square, like, more of a rectangular shape, but I like them to have the same width and the same height. And not only that, but I want it to be a number with the power of 2. And what do I mean when I say the power of 2? Well, let me open up Notepad and I'll write down all of the numbers that I can think of that are the power of 2. Well, first of all, you have the number 2. Then you have the number 4. Then you have 8. Then you have 16. Then you have, what comes after that? 32. Then you have 64. Then you have, I believe, 128. And then you have 256. And then you have 512. And then you have 1024. And then you have 2048. So if you picked up the pattern, I'm just multiplying by 2 every single time. So 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, 16 times 2, and so on and so forth. So you just keep on multiplying by 2. And it's good to, well, I guess you don't really have to memorize these numbers, but you'll probably get used to these numbers because you're going to see them a lot. Because, well, computers really like these numbers, and Unity really likes these numbers. It just makes things really simple for the computer to make its calculations. So in this case, we're going to use 512. And my rule of thumb is if you're creating a new image and you're like, what size should I make this image? Should I make it 1,000 by 1,000 or 2,000 by 2,000, or you just don't know what size to make it? I think that a good rule of thumb is that if you don't know what size to make your texture, just do 512 by 512. It's just a good medium number that most of the time it'll do you good and it'll be just fine. So I'm not going to save that text file. So anyways, here we're back in GIMP. So I'm going to have my image size be 512 by 512, and I already have it set there. You can just go in and just type it as whatever you want. Let me backspace that. I want 512. All right, so 512 by 512, and I hit enter, and I created a new project. And as you can see, we have little tabs up here, and there is my old project, and this is my new project. So we can have multiple projects open at once, and that can be very useful. All right, so here we are. We have a blank project, and one thing I want to show you really quickly is when you first open up GIMP, it might look more like this. So let me actually take this old project and let me exit out of it to simplify it. I actually got to drag this over here. It's on my other window. Got to drag that in there. Got to drag that in there. So this is one thing that GIMP might look like when you first open it up. Like, this is what by default it looks like. It's in multiple windows. Personally, I don't really like this because oftentimes I lose sight of where these windows are and I have to rearrange them and move them around and have to be more careful about where I'm clicking. So I don't know. I guess it comes down to personal preference. Technically, it's the same thing, but I don't really like this multiple window mode. So we're just going to go up here. So find your main window. It's probably going to be the biggest one in the center. And you see you have File, Edit, Select. Go all the way over to Window. We're going to select Window. And we're going to go down here. We're going to click on Single Window Mode. And bam, there we go. Everything is combined into one single window and it's all nice and clean. And that is what we want to use. Well, that's what I'm going to be using in this tutorial series. And then from there, you can see that this is kind of similar, well, sort of similar to the way that Blender works and Unity works, where you have different windows that you can drag around. Like, for example, the layers window. I can just drag this over here and I can pull it into its own window. Or I can drag it down here, and let's see if I can put this back where it was. Let's see, can I put it down here? There we go. See that? It's really finicky. See that little blue line? There we go. So it stuck itself right there. We can resize that. We have different types of windows. So you can rearrange your windows, and I'm going to keep my windows like this, where I have I don't know if you can even move these around, but you have all of your tools up here. Like we have a paintbrush, we have an eraser, we have a, where is it? Scale tool right there. We have a scale tool. We have a selection tool that we can use to select things, like a box select like that. I'm going to press Control Z. So you have all of your buttons up there and your color picker right here. So sometimes this window will appear in a weird place. So sometimes you've got to be careful and, you know, move your windows around because things can be appearing behind things. You might lose sight of what you're looking for. So just be wareful of that. Is wareful a word? I don't really know. But anyways, let's see, we have our brushes over here. Over here we have a couple of tabs, but the one I like to have open is my, let's see if I rest my mouse over it, my undo history. So this will basically be a visualization of what will happen if I keep on hitting Control Z. So all of my steps that I've taken. So, you know, if I want to go back, I can hit Control Z and there it is. So yeah, that is the history window. I actually don't use it too often. I usually just hit Control Z when I do something that, you know, I want to undo. And the layers window, that's very important. I use the layers window all the time, and we're going to talk about layers in this episode. And we got our brushes down here. We have a couple of other things, but let's focus on brushes, at least for this episode. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to colorize this background. I want to set it to a color that's somewhat closer to a cardboard box. So I'm going to select my paint bucket tool right there. As you can see, it looks like a paint bucket. You've probably seen it in other programs as well. And then I'm going to select my color picker. So I'm going to click on that black square right there. And I'm just going to use these controls to pick a color. So I guess first I'm going to go to this little rainbow bar right here and move this little line until I get to somewhat close to the color that I want. And I want kind of a brownish, tannish color. So sort of between orange and yellow, so probably about there. And now I can drag around the brightness and darkness and up and down for the saturation. So if I move it to that corner, it's really bright. Move it over there, it's really dark. Move it over there, it's just white. So I'm going to pick somewhere in the middle until I get to kind of a desaturated tan color. So probably about there. Whatever, good enough. So I have my color selected, and I'm just going to click, and it's going to fill the background. And as you can see, we have a layer down here that's called background. Alright, so this is our first layer. So we by default have one layer. So if you're wondering what a layer is, kind of imagine that you have transparent pieces of paper that you can stack on top of each other, and on each of those pieces of paper you can draw something on that piece of paper, and then you can stack those pieces of paper on top of each other and you can see through all of them, and you can see everything that you drew on all of those layers of paper. So that's basically kind of like what layers are. So if I create a new layer, I'm going to click on that little symbol down there that means new layer, and then this little window is going to pop up, and it's going to ask us a couple of settings, like what do we want the layer to be named. We can name this anything that we want. Honestly, I never rename my layers. I am simply too lazy. You might want to do that yourself. Sometimes I do it if I have a bunch of layers and I'm trying to stay a little bit organized. But you know what? Honestly, I don't really care. I never name my layers, and I don't think you have to either, but you can if you want, if that's something you would like to do. All right, so we have a bunch of other options as well. We can change the size of the layer. Personally, I like to just leave that by default, just leave it to be the size of the document. That just tends to be what I like to leave it as and leaves me the less problems, if that made sense. Anyways, and then we can pick what color we want the layer to be. And I usually just leave it as transparent so that it's just blank and I can add whatever I want to it. So I'm going to leave it as transparent. You could do white or, the other settings as well. I believe background color will make it, in this case, white, because that's what we have that color as. Is that our background color? And I think that's our foreground color. So if I have it selected to this, it will be this brownish color. If I have it selected to this, I believe it will be the white color, which we can change that as well. Or we can just have it be white. But honestly, 9 times out of 10, I just leave all the default settings. I don't name it. I just leave it as the default name. I set it to the same size as my GIMP file or my document image size, in this case 512 by 512. I just leave it as that, and I leave that as transparent, and bam, I just leave it as defaults. So there we go. We have the background layer, and we have our new layer that we just created that's called layer. And on top of this, let's grab my paintbrush, and I'm going to change, I'm going to click on this little, I don't know how to describe that little switchy double arrow thing, and that can switch what my selected color is. So this is useful, if I want to do a bright blue color, let's say. Whoops, I clicked on the wrong one. Can I Control Z that? Control Z? Nope. Let's redo that. There we go. Okay, so I went to my history and I just clicked on the most recent one. So there we go. So I'm going to change this back to, can I do a color picker? Yeah, there we go. So that little symbol means, I guess, eyedrop tool. So when you click on it, whatever you click on, I wonder if I can click on other things. Can I click on that? Oh, sweet. I can click on, it looks like anything on the screen. So this little eyedrop tool, basically you select that. When your mouse looks like that, you can go around. If you see a color, you're like, I want that color. And bam, it selected that color. But in this case, I want it to be that color. I'm going to select that. And now I'm going to select this white box here, and I'm going to change it to, say, bright blue. So now I have 2 colors selected. I have my brownish color and my bright blue color, and that little tool just makes it easy to switch back and forth between 2 colors, like if you have 2 colors that you're commonly using. And I can also click on that little symbol to set it back to black and white, but in this case I want brown and blue. So I'm going to switch it to blue, so I'm using blue. And I'm going to take my paintbrush tool. I can choose what shape I want my paintbrush to be. So let's say it's this shape here. And I can just draw. And as you can see, I am drawing, but I'm not drawing on the brown. If I click on this little eyeball here, you can see that I'm drawing on my new layer because I can turn that layer on and off. I can turn the background layer on and off too. And one thing to note is that checkerboard pattern just means transparent. That's kind of a universal symbol for, this is see-through, and, I don't really know how to explain it. Just checkerboard pattern means that it is transparent. There's nothing behind it, and the computer has to draw something there. So instead of drawing white or black, it draws a checkerboard, because in the world of graphic design, checkerboard usually means transparent. So I'm going to turn that back on. We have our background layer. I could edit this background layer. Let's say I want to add a little bit of texture to this background layer so that it's not just completely perfectly flat brown. So I'm going to add a little bit of noise to that background. So I'm going to go up to Filter, Noise, HSV Noise. I don't really know what that stands for, but I know that that's going to give me some noise. And I have some settings that I can play around with. I don't really know what holdness does. I guess you can drag it around and kind of visually see what it does. I think I want it to be right there. I don't know what hue does. Let's see what hue does. I guess it kind of adds a little bit of color to your noise. Saturation. Maybe it changes when you have your hue up. I'm not really sure. A lot of things when it comes to graphic images and, just creating images is that when you see a bunch of sliders and you don't know what they do, slide it around and you'll see what they do. And a lot of times it's hard to just like explain what they do. And sometimes it's just easier to just see it. So I'm just going to drag these around until it looks kind of like a cardboard type texture to me. And yeah, that looks pretty good to me. So I'll hit OK to apply. And as you can see, that noisy texture has been added to our black or our brown background. And it hasn't been added to our blue scribbles. So I just want to emphasize that these layers are separate. Let me grab another layer. I'm going to leave these all as default. I created another layer, and this time I'm going to draw in, let's say, red. I'm going to take my paintbrush and I'm going to scribble around some more. And these are separate layers, and we can reorganize these layers. Like, let's say I want this blue layer to be on top. I just grab this and I drag and drop it up there, and bam, there it goes. One thing to note is I've had a little bit of problems in the past with dragging and dropping around layers. And sometimes you can get glitches in GIMP, and sometimes if that happens, just close it and reopen it. And so if things are acting weird and you can't figure it out, like you're trying to press a button that you thought would do something and it's not doing what you want, just close it and reopen it, and hopefully that should fix it. I've run into that problem before, and hopefully that will save you a headache, because it certainly gave me a headache. All right, so yeah, we can reorganize layers. We can turn layers on and off. We can even make layers transparent with this little bar up here. So yeah, let's start using these layers, and let's start creating something that looks more like a cardboard box. So I'm going to take these layers and I'm going to delete them. I can either right click and go to, where is it? Delete layer. Or I can drag and drop the layer onto that trash can there. Alright, so I now only have my default little background layer, and I'm going to create a new layer on top of that. I'm going to use all the default settings there. And now what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to add some vertical lines, like a vertical kind of texture, because you know how sometimes cardboard has that like ridge kind of texture with, that goes in lines. So I'm going to create something that kind of looks like that. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my paint bucket tool, and I'm going to swap that around so that I have a brown color. And I don't even really know. I'm just going to drag that brown color around a little bit just to make it a little bit different. There's no real science to what I'm doing here. I'm just kind of just changing colors and clicking on stuff until it looks cool. Alright, so I grab my paint bucket tool. I have a transparent layer with nothing on it, and I'm going to use my paint bucket tool to just fill that in. And now I have a solid layer with color on it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some noise to it so that I can manipulate it and stretch it so that I have something to add vertical lines to. If that makes any sense, you'll see what I mean in a second. So I'm going to go to Filter, Noise, HSV Noise, and you'll see that this is just one of my own personal techniques. Is I really like to start with noise a lot of time. I really like to add noise to stuff, and that's just a personal preference. That it's just kind of a technique that I've built over time. And there's hundreds and hundreds of different techniques that come up with different art styles when it comes to creating graphic images. So don't worry, you don't have to create every image the same way that I do. I'm just showing you the way that I do it. And I just really like starting with noise because it gives me a good starting place. So I've created a layer, it has noise on it, and now I want to manipulate it and stretch it into some long lines. And to do that, I'm going to do a motion blur. So I'm going to go up to Filters again, Blur, I'm going to go to Motion Blur. And you can see that I have a bunch of settings. I can do a radial blur, zoom blur, and you can see that it gives me a preview of what the image is going to look like up here. And in this case, I want to do a linear blur, which means that it's going to blur it as if, like, if you've ever taken a picture with a camera and your camera was moving while you took the picture and you have those like blurred lines. Or let's say if you take a picture of a car that's driving super fast and it's blurred because it's moving so fast. Well, that's kind of what a linear blur is like. It's as if you took a picture of something that's moving super fast. So yeah, it's just going to kind of stretch it in a blurred fashion, I guess. And we have two settings down here when it comes to linear blur. We have angle and length. And angle, if I change this, you'll see it changes what direction the blur is in. And in this case, I want it to be up and down. So I'm just going to select this number and do 90 because I know that 90 is up and down. And I can change the length of it. Like if I have it really short, like let's have it like there, you can see it blurs just a little. If I have it really long, whoops, there we go, it blurs a lot. So I'm probably going to put it like that. I think that preview looks pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and just save it like that. And bam, there we go. So now we have some vertical lines for our cardboard box. One thing that I'm seeing right now, and this might not be that big of a problem to you, but personally I'm going to try to fix this. Down here you can see that that blur, it had kind of a weird effect. It didn't really know what to blur with when it got to the edge of the image. So we lost a little bit of that blur effect down here. And honestly, it kind of looks okay, but I'm going to stretch this image and kind of crop it in and kind of basically I want to stretch these corners out like that so they're on the outside of the image, so that basically I'm going to drag this part that I just think doesn't look good, and I'm just going to drag it to the outside of the image where we can't see it. So to do that, I'm going to use our scale tool, which is that one right there. And this scale tool is going to allow me to resize whatever layer that I have selected. So I'm just going to click on it to turn the tool on, and you'll see that this little window popped up. And we can edit our scale using this tool here, but I prefer to just do it by hand. So the way the scale tool works is we can either scale it by clicking anywhere in here and just dragging around, and we can also move it by clicking on this circle and moving it around like that, or we can drag these corners around and just stretch it and manipulate it towards what we want. And you'll see that this dotted line, this kind of yellow and black dotted line that makes that square, that's the edge of our image. So everything outside of that we won't be able to see once we apply this scale tool. So I'm going to go ahead and hit scale to apply that, and bam, there we go. So we can see that dotted line shows the edge of that layer. If I select this layer, the dotted line shows the edge of the layer, and we can also just see what our image is. If that made any sense, the size of our image. We have a visual representation of what our image is going to look like when we bring it into our video game. Alright, and you can see that I can turn that layer on and off. I can go to this opacity bar right here, and one thing that I noticed about the opacity bar that makes it easier for me is that when your mouse is on like the bottom half of the bar, you see that symbol there, and that makes it kind of hard to drag it, in my opinion. I like to move my mouse up to the second half of this bar until I see that little up arrow like that, and then I can just drag the opacity to exactly where I want. And opacity basically just means see-throughness, how transparent it is. So you can see if I drag it to about there, it's a little bit transparent. I can still see the vertical lines, but I can also see the background, the noisiness underneath. So I think that looks pretty cool. That kind of looks like cardboard. So I'm going to leave it like that. So now I'm going to create a new layer. And there's my new layer window. I'm going to leave all the defaults and just hit OK. And now I'm going to create kind of a secondary layer to this cardboard. So you know how cardboard sometimes rips in half and you can see the inside of it and the outside of it's smooth, and there's like layers to that cardboard. So that's kind of what I'm going to do in here. So what I'm going to do is, how should we do this? I'm trying to think of, I guess let's keep things simple, and I'm just going to do this all with the paintbrush. So I'm going to select my paintbrush tool, and I'm going to select a paintbrush that I think will give me a little bit more of a cardboard sort of texture. I'm just going to select that paintbrush right there. And I'm going to select a new color. I'm probably going to do something that's a little bit more desaturated, but a little bit lighter. Yeah, something like that. Whatever. I'm just kind of picking random colors. And I'm just going to scribble. And I'm just going to scribble on my new layer. And I'm just going to scribble around so that it looks like I have like a top layer. And there's like little, rips where you can see the underside or the, interior of this cardboard. If it's like cardboard with multiple layers, I'm just going to scribble around until whatever. I don't really know exactly what I'm trying to get to. So I'm just going to scribble around, scribble around. All right, I think that looks pretty good. And there we go. So one thing you might notice about this, you scribbled around, and then now that it's there, you might think, that's not quite the color that I wanted. So you might think that, nah, I got to delete this layer and redo it, or I got to scribble over top of it with a new color. But one thing that's really cool is that we can manipulate the color of the entire layer. And it doesn't matter if this layer has multiple colors. Like if I start drawing on it with this like orange color, I can manipulate those two different colors at the same time because I had them selected, or I had this layer selected when I was scribbling. So both of these two colors are on the same layer. So I'm going to press Control Z because that's actually not the look that I wanted. I want it to look like that. But I want to show you how we can manipulate the colors of a layer. So with our layer selected down here, we're going to go up here to Colors. And I'm going to go to Hue and Saturation. And this little window is going to pop up. And you can see that I can change the hue, which basically makes me cycle through the colors of the rainbow. And I can adjust what color I wanted. So I can drag it over a little bit. Like I wanted it to be a little bit more green. Or I want it to be a little bit more red. I'm probably going to leave it maybe a little bit more red. Didn't really adjust it that much. We can change the lightness of it. We can change the saturation of it, like how bright the color is. So we can make it really gray. We can make it a really bright, vibrant color. I'm probably going to put it, no, I don't know, about there. So basically, I'm just dragging around these bars until it looks good. And once again, that's just one of the big things about creating graphic images is a lot of times you just play around with it and you manipulate it with no real science behind what you're doing, and you just play around with it until it just looks like, till it looks good, till it looks like what you're trying to go for. So one thing I want to do to this layer is I want to add a little bit of noise to it because I don't want it to be perfectly solid because, I don't think cardboard is super smooth. It has a little bit of a texture to it. So I'm going to go to my filter and I'm going to go to noise, HSV noise once again, and I'm going to lower the value because I don't want too much noise. Might play around with the holdness. I just want a really, really subtle amount of noise where you can see it, but you don't really think about it. Like it's just barely there. So yeah, that looks like kind of what I want to go for. Alright, so now this is starting to look kind of like a cardboard box, I guess. But one thing that I want to do is I want to add a little bit of a light layer underneath of this layer. And in fact, I might actually darken it up just a little bit now that I'm looking at it. And one thing I can do, that I can go to Hue and Saturation again, or I can go to Levels. I use levels very often when I'm making images. And basically levels, you have these three bars, or these three little triangles that you can drag around. And basically what this does is if you drag the little black triangle, this makes your darks darker when you drag it towards the middle. And over here, if I grab the white one, it makes your lights lighter. And if I drag the middle one, this basically changes basically what our grays are, so our middle point. So if we want, our middle values are our middle parts of our images that are light or dark, if we're going between white and black and gray, our, medium brightness and darkness parts of our image, we can make those brighter by dragging it that way, or darker by dragging them that way. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it this way a little bit. I'm going to make my darks a little bit darker, not too much, just a little bit. I just want to make it just a little bit darker. All right, that looks good to me. So I'm going to press OK and apply those settings. So that's just another way that you can adjust the colors and the brightness and the darkness. And there's a bunch of different tools that you can play around with. But anyways, what I want to do is I want to add a little bit of lightness underneath the this kind of top layer, because you know when you rip cardboard, there's always that medium section that's kind of in the middle that's usually a lighter color. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to take this layer and I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to go up to duplicate layer. And now I have two of this layer. As you can see, it's kind of hard to see because they're exactly the same. So when I have both of them on, it's kind of weird because well, I'll change one and then you'll see that there's two different layers and you can see them right there. They're identical. And that's why it's hard to see when I turn them both on. So I'm going to take the bottom one. I'm going to turn the top one off to get it out of my way so I can see the bottom one a little bit better, this layer right here. And I'm going to make it a little bit lighter. So I'm going to go to colors. I'm going to go to levels. And I'm going to drag the white triangle to make my lights lighter. And I'm going to make it like that. And now that I'm looking at it, it's kind of a bright color. I want to make it a little bit more gray. So I'm going to go to colors, hue, and saturation. And I'm going to drag the saturation down. So it's not all the way gray, but it's a little bit more gray. Not all the way gray. Just, yeah, about there. Maybe I'll drag the lightness up a little bit. Yeah, probably about there. That looks good to me. So now you'll see that when I turn that layer on, we have two different layers. We have the layer that I just made lighter, and I'll turn that off, and we have the layer that is now, or that was darker. So there we go. And now what I want to do is I want to stretch this layer out a little bit so that you can actually see it underneath this layer here, because right now, because they're the exact same shape and the exact same placement, when I turn this layer on, it just covers up this bottom layer. So I want to make this layer scale out a little bit so that I can see the edges of it. So I'm going to select this bottom layer. I'm going to go up to my scale tool and I'm just going to click on the layer and then it will rescale the layer that I have selected. And I have this layer right here selected. So I have this little window here. I'm just going to ignore it and I'm just going to drag it by hand. I'm just going to drag it a little bit that way, not too much. I'm going to drag it a little bit that way. And I just want to make it so that it's a little bit bigger so that it stretches out so that I can see the edges of this from underneath this layer. And I can see it above this layer because my scale tool is affecting it. So it makes it on top of it so that I can see it, if that makes any sense. Basically, it's giving me a preview. My scale tool, because I have it opened right now, it's giving me a preview of the layer that I am scaling. So it's bringing it up to the top temporarily just while I'm scaling it. But when I apply the scale, it'll go back to the bottom where it was in my order of layers inside of my layer window. And now you can see, now that I have rescaled it and I pulled it out, I can see the corners of it. And it kind of looks like cardboard. Might not be the most photorealistic cardboard you've ever seen, but hey, whatever. It looks kind of mostly like cardboard. And one thing that I'm seeing right now, I want to make those vertical lines underneath a little bit more visible so that you can see them just a little bit better. So I'm going to select that layer, and if I get confused as to what layer that was, a lot of times, because I am lazy and I don't rename my layers, if I can't tell by the little icon or the little thumbnail in my layer menu, sometimes I just turn it on and off, and then I can visually see what layer that is because I'm turning it on and off. And now that I'm turning this layer on and off, I know that that's my layer with the vertical lines. So I'm going to add a little bit more contrast between the light parts and the dark parts of these vertical lines so that these vertical lines stick out more. So to do that, I'm going to do my levels. So I'm going to go to colors, levels, and I'm going to make my darks darker. I'm going to drag that over, and I'm going to make my lights lighter. So now that my lights are lighter and my darks are darker, I can see it a little bit better. And the closer I drag these to each other, and this little like mountain looking thing can give us a visual representation of where the darks are and where the lights are. So I can drag those next to each other, and you can see the darks are very dark and the lights are very light, so it makes those lines a lot easier to see. And I can drag this little gray left and right until it just looks right. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to apply that. But so now that I can see those lines a little bit better, it's weird because it's this bright red color. So I'm going to desaturate it. So I'm going to go to colors, hue and saturation, and I'm going to drag my saturation down a little bit until it's a little bit more gray. I'm actually probably going to drag the lightness up a little bit just until it looks right. I think I want to change the hue as well. I'm going to drag it a little bit that way. There's no real science to what I'm doing. I'm just dragging it around until it just basically looks right. Okay, so there we go. That looks somewhat like a cardboard box. And I might change the opacity of that. Maybe like that. I might change the opacity of this one. Just dragging it up and down. Just playing around with settings until it just looks right. Do I want to change the opacity of that? Nah, I want to leave that up all the way. In fact, I might want to blur this just a tiny bit. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, which basically means just like blur like your camera is out of focus, or maybe, you know, if you're forgot to put your glasses on in the morning and, you know, your vision is blurry. That's the type of blurriness that Gaussian blur does. And you can see we have a little preview, and we can adjust how it blurs on vertical and horizontal in pixels. Basically, they're linked together, and, you know, just press these up and down arrows to make it blurrier, down to make it less blurrier, and just keep on doing it until it just looks right. I'm going to do a little bit lower, and I'm just looking at this preview. It's a very subtle difference. I'm probably just going to stick it like that. Nah, that didn't make that big of a difference, but I think it looks maybe a tiny bit better, you know. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and leave it like that. And the last thing I want to do is I want to add a barcode to our cardboard box to, you know, make it look like something that got shipped to us in the mail or something along those lines. So I am going to create a new layer. There's my little layers window. I'm just going to leave it as transparent and all that stuff. Hit OK. So I got my new layer. And I'm going to use the selection tool for this. So that's this tool up here, the box selection tool. And basically what the box selection tool does is it allows me to select something. And now when I have this box dragged around here, when I just drag a box like that, I have this box, and this box is what I am focusing on. So if I now select my like brush tool and maybe switch to red so that you can see it, and I color around, I'm only going to affect what I have selected. So if I draw over here, nothing. If I draw inside my box, you can see what I'm drawing inside that box. So I'm only affecting what I have selected. And the selection tool will affect just about every tool. I wonder if I scale this, if it will only scale. Yeah, it only scales what I have selected. Now if I hit scale, oh wait, whoops. I forgot I didn't have the right layer selected. So if I select this layer and then scale it, and then hit scale, you can see that it has rescaled just that square. So I'm going to hit Control Z because that's not actually what I wanted. So I'm going to go back to this layer, and because I know that my selection tool will affect pretty much all of these tools, and it will only select, or it will only edit what I have selected in here, I'm going to use the paint bucket tool to fill in this box selection. So first, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to just make a rectangle. And I'm going to click on this little symbol here just to get the color black. I could have also clicked on there and actually selected black like that. It doesn't really matter. That little button down there is just a quick way of, you know, let's say I had a red, and, you know, let's say I had blue, and I'm like, okay, I have these two colors, but I just want to go back to black and white. I can just click on that little symbol, and it quickly takes you to black and white. So there I have black selected, and if I take my paint bucket tool and fill it, you can see that it has filled on the layer that I have selected in the box area that I have selected, that I selected with my selection tool, my box selection tool, or I guess it's called the rectangle select tool. So I only affected the area that I had selected, and I only affected the layer that I had selected. So I'm going to hit Control Z because I want to take this one step farther. So if I'm going to go back to my rectangle selection tool, or what I've been calling the box selection tool, and I'm going to choose where I want my barcode to be. And I want my barcode to be, oh, I don't know, probably right here, because I want it to be on the cardboard itself. So I want it to be just you know, just a little, well, actually, I kind of didn't, I didn't really like plan this out right, because I don't really want my barcode to go over these vertical lines because that won't really look realistic. I guess I could if I want, but I think I'm just going to make my barcode a little bit smaller. Probably put it, I'll put it right there. That's kind of weird for a cardboard box, but whatever. I'm just going to make that. Now what I can do is I can hold down Control and Shift with my box selection tool to add to my selection or remove from my selection. So I'll first show you add. So if I hold down Shift, you can see that little plus symbol. So I'm holding down Shift, let go of Shift, holding down Shift. So you can see that little plus symbol. So when that little plus symbol is there, that means I'm going to add to my selection. So if I drag another box, I have two boxes selected. So I have those two areas selected. So let's say, you know, I use the paint bucket tool. It's going to affect the two areas I have selected. So I'm going to hit Control Z because that's not what I wanted. And I can also make these boxes overlap. So if I hold down Shift and drag, and I can drag over those, you can see that it has combined all three of that selection. So all of them combined together. And I can remove selection with Control. So I'm holding down Control, or I believe that's probably Command on a Mac. I actually haven't used GIMP on a Mac, so I don't know that for sure. But anyways, at least on a PC, it's Control. So anyways, you hold down Control to make that little minus symbol, and this will remove selection. So if I drag a box around here, it's going to take that box away, as you can see. So I can take stuff away as well. So I'm going to take that technique. I'm going to start over just by clicking outside of it. And I'm going to drag a rectangle of where I want my barcode to be. And I want the inside, or basically I want this to be just an outline. I want to outline the outside of my barcode. So I'm going to hold down Control to minus the inside of this box. So I'm going to click and I'm going to draw a rectangle inside of my rectangle. And now it's kind of hard to see right now, but now I only have selected this little outline right here because I took away the middle. And now I want to add to this again. I want to add some vertical lines or some vertical shapes. So I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm just going to draw a really tall skinny box just like that. And I'm going to keep on doing that, and I'm going to vary them in the amount of width that they have. Make some skinny, make some wide, and I'm really making sure that my mouse cursor is inside of this box right here, because when I add my selection, it's just going to overlap on top of it. One thing is that we can zoom in if we want to have a little bit more room on what we're working on. So to zoom in, we can either go down here and change it to say 200%. So that is the percent of how far we're zoomed in. We can also go up to View, Zoom, and we have a couple of zoom settings up there. And then a shortcut key is just plus. And I believe minus works as well. Yeah, so we can press plus and minus to zoom in and out. So now you can see I'm really close, and I can really have more detail with what I'm doing. I have more room to do exactly what I want to do. So I'm just dragging big lines and little lines until I have the outline of a barcode. So now I have a big dotted kind of like, it looks like ants crawling around in a circle, but I have a dotted line of the barcode that I want. So now I'm going to select the layer that I want to put my barcode on. I'm going to select the paint bucket tool, make sure I have black, and I'm just going to fill in, and then bam, it filled everything in, and that made a barcode. So now I can deselect either by just taking my selection tool and clicking out of it, or I can go to select none, which in the shortcut key is Shift Control A. So I deselected that. And another way I can zoom out is I can hold down Control and then use the mouse wheel. So I can zoom in and out to what I want that way. So there we go. We have a barcode. And let's say that barcode, now that I made it, that's not quite the right placement. It's a little too big. I want to make it smaller. Well, I can just take my scale tool, click on it, and I can just scale it, just like any other layer. And I'll select that little center point to move it, and I'll move it like right there. I'll scale, and bam, there we go. It has scaled it. And one thing I want to do to make this look a little bit more realistic is I want to make it slightly transparent. Not too transparent, but just enough so you can see a little bit of cardboard underneath it. Just a tiny bit, probably like that. That looks good to me. And I'm going to blur it just a tiny, tiny bit because I don't want it to be too blurry, but I don't want these lines to be super, super sharp. I want it to look a little bit realistic, and I want to make it look like the ink of the barcode has faded a little bit, or maybe rubbed off a little bit, or, you know, it just doesn't look super, super sharp like it's on a computer screen. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I can move my little window up here to the where I can see the barcode. So you might like come up in here and not see anything and move your view around until you see what you're trying to affect. And I'm going to adjust this. I think 6 is too much, so I'm going to go down, and I'm probably going to do just like 1 or 2. I want it to be very subtle, probably 2. You can barely see the difference, but I think it's going to make just a tiny bit of difference and make it just look a tiny bit more realistic. So yeah, there we go. Whoops, cancel, wrong button. So yeah, now we have basically something that looks like a cardboard box. So let's go ahead and save this, and as you can see up there, it says untitled, and there's a little star right there, which on computers, that's usually the universal symbol for you need to save this, or there's been changes that have not been saved yet. So let's go ahead and save our GIMP file so that we can come back and edit this later so that we have all of these separate layers. Like, let's say later on we decide that I don't want that layer, I just want to get rid of that layer. We'll have the option to do that because we'll save the GIMP file so that we have all of these settings available. Or, you know, if we want to make the barcode less transparent, you know, we're just going to have all of this information here that we can edit later. Whereas if we save it as a JPEG, it's just going to be a flat image, and, well, we could edit it, but it's going to be as if it only has one layer, and it's going to be a lot harder. Like, we won't be able to individually edit, or, you know, say if we want to move this, you know, if we want to move it there, we won't be able to do that because it will all be flattened onto just a flat image that's, you know, it's just a flat 2D image with no layers. So let's save it as a GIMP file, and then when we import it into Unity, we'll create a copy of it. It's a flat image or a JPEG file that Unity will be able to read. So anyways, I'll just show you in case that didn't make any sense. I'm going to go to File, Save, or you can do Save As if you already saved it. Choose what folder you want to save it in, and in this case, you know, I guess GIMP has its own little file explorer window, so it looks a little bit different than what you might be used to. But just go around until you find the file that you want. I know that mine is on my Quadzilla drive. I'm going to go to Quadzilla Files, Game Development, Indoctrination, and GIMP Files and Textures, and I'm going to save it in here. And at the beginning of the tutorial, I did Cardboard Box 1, so I'll save this as, oh, I don't know, I guess I'll save it as Cardboard Box 2. So Cardboard Box 2, and I'll just save it like that. Enter, and it has saved. So there we go. We have the file saved, and you know, if we want to come back to it later, we can just go to Open, or you can go to Open Recent, and it should be in this list right here. And you can go to Open, and let me find the window there. This window will pop up, and you can go around. You can find the .xcf file that you want, and that file type can only be opened with GIMP. So I'm gonna hit cancel. Otherwise, like, you know, if you wanted to open it, well, I'll open my old one as an example, Cardboard Box 1, the one from the beginning of this tutorial. So I'll open this up. I'll hit open, and you'll see that it has opened that image in a new tab. So I have these two tabs here. So here are my two GIMP project files. So I'm gonna exit out of that one. So now I want to import this into Unity, and I'll open up Unity to show you, and I'm going to create a cube. So I'm going to create a cube. I'm going to rename this cube Cardboard Box Cube, whatever, you can name it whatever you want. And you'll see that I can bring the XCF file in here. So if I go to my File Explorer, there we go. So if I go to my files here, where I have my files, and I just drag and drop this, my cardboard box 2, the one I just created, if I drag and drop this into Unity, or let's say I'll drag it into my assets folder, just like that. If I take a look at it, I have the file there, but when I select it, I can't see anything. There's nothing I can do with it. So I can see the file, and I could put it in here if I want to for organizational purposes, but there's nothing I can really do with it, so it's kind of useless. Well, I mean, it's not totally useless because I can use this to go back and edit it later. If I just double click on it, it will open it up in GIMP. And as you can see, it has opened up 2 copies of the same file. And I'll just exit out of that second one. So it is useful to have it inside of Unity, but it's not useful for the game itself. We can't actually bring this into the game. So that's why we need to export this as a JPEG. And before I do that, I'm actually going to create a new folder. And I'm going to call this folder textures. And I'm going to drag and drop this inside of the textures folder just to stay organized. All right, so there we go. My GIMP file, or my, what was it, XCF or XCF file, my GIMP file is right here. So I am going to, well, let's close out of GIMP for demonstrational purposes. So let's say I want to edit this file. I can double click on it. There's GIMP, it's opening up, and bam, there we go. It has opened up the file, and now let's export it as a JPEG. So I go to File, Export, or I guess I should go to Export As. It's kind of like Save As and Save. If you hit Save before you have saved it at all, it'll kind of act like Save As, and you can choose where you want to save it and what name you want to save it with. Whereas if it's already saved and then you hit Save, it's just going to quickly overwrite what you had before. It's just going to quickly save it. So that's kind of what Export and Export As is like. So I'll show you that in just a second. So I'm going to first do Export As, and this little window is going to pop up. And this looks pretty similar to Save As, except I can choose what file type I want to export this as. And I believe to change the file type, I go here where it says all export images, and I want to do a JPEG. And I believe it's alphabetical, so A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Where's JPEG? Somewhere in this list. JPEG. Oh, there it goes. I don't know why I didn't see that. JPEG image. I'm going to select that. And I'm trying to remember why. Let's see. Oh, I guess I need to select that down here. Oh, okay. I messed up. So that doesn't actually affect how you're going to save it as. This little setting, this little bar where you can see all of these different file types, that just selects what you can see. I guess you have to, I kind of forgot, you have to go down here where it says select file type by extension. Click on that little plus symbol to open that up, and then here's where you go to determine what type you're going to save it as. I'm going to scroll down until I find what I want, and I want JPEG. And as you can see, it changed the name up here to .jpeg, and you want it to be .jpeg because that's the file type that we want. And we can go ahead and leave that as cardboard box 2, and yeah, I'll just leave it as that. You could change it to whatever you want and whatever makes sense to you. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit export, and we'll get one more little box that gives us some settings. We have some advanced settings, but honestly, I'll leave those all as default. I don't really care about those. The only one I really care about is quality. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to do 100 quality. You can do that if you want, if you're a patient person. But if you do a really, really high quality, it's going to take a little bit longer, just a few seconds longer to export. And I know from experience that I can drag this down to about 70, 75, somewhere around there, and it will export a heck of a lot faster. It'll take like 1 second as opposed to like 10 seconds. And if this is something I'm going to be doing over and over again to update this image, like if I make a little change, I want to go back into Unity to see what it looks like in the video game itself in 3D space. I'm going to keep on re-exporting it. And if I have it set really high and it takes 10 seconds every single time I make a tiny little change, it's going to get kind of annoying. So I'm going to lower this down to 70 because I know that it's still going to look good, but it's just going to go a lot faster. So now that I have that set to 70, I'm going to select export, and then bam, it has exported. And it looks like nothing has happened, but if I go into Unity, you can see, bam, there it is. It has exported. as the .jpeg file. If I right click and go to show in Explorer or show in Finder if you're on a Mac, you can see there's the cardboard2.jpg file, and if I double click it, it opens up inside of my Windows photo viewer just like it's any other picture on my computer, because it's just a regular old JPEG file. And yeah, so that is why that is really useful. And now I can take this and I can put it in a material. I can either just drag and drop this onto the box itself and it will automatically create a material for me. I think, there it goes. It created the material inside of the materials folder right there. But let's say that I want it to be more organized. I'm going to, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to materials. Well, I'm going to go to this one. Well, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that. And now that has turned bright pink because I deleted the material and it's like, I'm missing a material. I don't know what color to be. So I'm just going to turn bright pink so that you know that I need to be a material, or I need a material. So that's what happens when something turns bright pink inside of Unity. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my materials folder and I'm going to manually create a material. It doesn't really matter whichever way you want to do, whatever way works best for you. And I'm just going to call this cardboard, and you can call it whatever you want. And by default, it's just gray. So I'm going to go to my texture, and I'm going to grab my cardboard box 2, and I'm going to drag it in there. And bam, there we go. And I can click on that little shape to see what it looks like on a box, on a cylinder, on a donut, on a sphere. So yeah, there we go. Here's that material. I'm gonna go back to my material folder. So cardboard, and I can drag and drop it on there like that. And now we have that material. And you know, like I said in previous episodes, you can also just select it and drag and drop it like there. That will work as well. I think you can also go to add. Let's see, would it be under miscellaneous? No. Where is it under? Effects? Nope. It may be under rendering. Maybe you can't add it. Maybe it's somewhere in there. I don't know. I don't usually use that. I usually just drag and drop it. That works perfectly good for me. But anyways, there we go. We have a cardboard box, and that looks pretty awesome, right? That actually kind of looks like a pretty semi-realistic cardboard box. At least you can tell it's a cardboard box. But let's take a look at this, and let's say that, you know, I want this gray brownish color to be a little bit brighter or a little bit redder, or, you know, I just want to adjust it. I want to adjust this image. I can go to textures, and then remember how I said that we have our GIMP file and there's nothing we can do with this inside of Unity? Well, it's still nice to have inside of Unity because you can edit this anytime that you want by, well, let me close out of GIMP just to show you. Close out of it. So right now I only have Unity opened, and if I double click on this GIMP file from inside of Unity, it's going to open it up in GIMP. I'm going to open it up. There we go. I have all of my layers because it's a GIMP file. And let's take this one and let's say I want to go to colors, hue and saturation. I want to make it a little bit darker, maybe a little bit more saturated, maybe a little bit more red. You know, let's say that I just wanted to make that tiny little adjustments, just like that. Maybe I want to add a little bit more noise to it. Filter, noise, HSV noise. I want to increase that a little bit. Let's add it like that. You know, let's say that looks good. Maybe let's add a little bit of a blur, just a tiny bit, not too much. 5's probably too much. I want to do like blur 2. That's probably good. So let's say, you know, there we go. I made my changes. That's what I want it to be. I can go to File, Save, or I can hit Control S, and there we go. It's saved, but that only affected our Blender file. If I go into Unity, I'll show you that only affected this file here, which is a file type that Unity can't read. It's just a file type that's only meant for GIMP. And you can see that our cardboard box still looks exactly the same. So how do we update that? Well, we could export it again and then, you know, drag and drop that file into our project window and delete the old one and then reapply that to the material. But honestly, that's a little bit time consuming. That's kind of a pain in the butt. That's going to take a while. So a faster way is we just go to GIMP. And remember when I said export as, and export is kind of like save as and save? Well, since we already exported as and we chose where to export it to and what to export it as, like a .jpeg. We chose what name to export it with, the cardboard box 2, and we chose all of those settings, what folder it goes into. We chose all of those settings, so now, since we already did export as, we can select export, and it's going to do all of that stuff again with all of the same settings, and it's going to overwrite what we had before. So when I hit export, or the shortcut is Control E, wait, why did this, I guess it's because I closed this and reopened it again. So I guess you need to keep GIMP open. That's kind of a pain in the butt, darn it. So I guess I'm going to select that. And now that I have that selected, it goes cardboardbox.jpg. So now that I have that selected, that means that I'm going to overwrite it. Alternatively, I could just make sure it has the same name and the same file type down here, but it's faster to just click on it and it will copy the name and the file type up here, and it will just export over top of that. So let's go to export, yes, replace, go to our settings, let's change it down to about 70 something so it goes fast, export, there we go, there it goes. And bam, there we go. It has actually changed. See how it's a little bit darker now, and it has that little bit of noise to it, to the changes that we made. So let's say that now we want to move this, what's it called, barcode. Let's say we want to move it up a little bit. So I'm going to go to GIMP, and I guess this is something I didn't realize before the tutorial. I guess that export and export as really only works the way I was thinking of when you have GIMP still open. So I guess every time you close it, it kind of resets. So anyways, I'm going to grab this and I'm going to move it. I guess I can use my move tool. Will that work? Yeah, that works just fine. So I'm going to move that and say, you know, that's how I want it. So I'm going to press Control S to save my GIMP file. And now I'm going to press Control E to export. And that was the same thing as going here and clicking on export right there. And oh, I guess you can see that that has changed from just plain old export to cardboardbox.jpg. So as you can see, it will tell you what it's going to export over, or what it's going to overwrite. So I can go ahead and just click on that. And now when I go into Unity, there, it moved. So you can see that that update has been changed. So I can just keep on going back and forth in GIMP, and let's say like, I want it in that corner right there. So I can go to GIMP, I can just move that there like that, press Control E, go into Unity, and bam, it has moved. So that is one really nice thing about you know, quickly changing an image and, you know, just quickly updating what you want your texture to look like. So yeah, I know that this has been a pretty long tutorial, and before I forget, let me hit Control S inside of GIMP to save that change in our GIMP file. Yeah, I know that this has been a really long tutorial, and one last thing I want to point out is, let's say I want to put that cardboard box texture on the table. I can go to my materials, there's my cardboard material. If I drag and drop it there, you can see that it's all just that brownish color. Same with if I put it on the computer. And that is because we haven't done UV mapping yet. Basically, UV mapping means that we're going to take the texture, and we're going to cut it apart and put it on the different surfaces of our model. And the reason why it was on this cube is that when you create a cube in Unity, it by default just has a UV map that basically says, take the entire texture and just slap it on every single side. So that's what the default UV map for the default cube in Unity is like. So in our next episode, we're going to learn how to UV map one of the models that we've created, because by default, it doesn't have any UV mapping, so it doesn't know what to do with this texture. So that's what we're going to learn in our next episode. So to do that, we're actually going to go back into Blender, and we're going to create a UV map, and then we're going to create a table texture to put on this table. And then, you know, from there, we'll learn how to put textures onto models that we've created. So yeah, I know this has been a really long tutorial, but hopefully this was a good, solid introduction and, you know, good visualization of how GIMP works, because, you know, I could have spent, you know, a bunch of time like I did with Blender explaining the little tools and what every tool does, but because GIMP and other graphic manipulation programs, because they're so similar, and the way that they work is so visual, I thought that it would be better to just show you more than tell you. And I know that I've talked a lot in this tutorial, so I've told you as well, but yeah, just I think seeing helps. So this was just one example of something that you can create in GIMP. I've seen a lot of people create some really amazing things in GIMP. If you have a digital camera, you can import digital images from real life into GIMP and then use those in your video game and, you know, manipulate those digital camera pictures and bring those into your video game, and really the possibilities are endless. So I hope this was a, well, it was kind of a long video, but a good solid introduction to GIMP. And you know, feel free to click around and see what all of these different buttons do. Some of them might not make sense, some of them might make sense. Just keep on clicking around, playing around, see what you can create. You know, just maybe take this image and just tear it apart. Just you know, add some crazy effects. You know, you can go to filter, like if you go to filter, there's a bunch of, you know, there's a big list right here, but underneath all of these, there's an even bigger list of more stuff in here. So there's a lot of stuff to play around with in GIMP. Also, feel free to go on YouTube and search for GIMP tutorials, and also just in Google search, there's a lot of written tutorials as well as video tutorials on how to use GIMP. So you can learn a bunch of other techniques that I didn't show you in this episode. And the great thing about GIMP is if you're watching a tutorial and they tell you how to use a certain tool, it doesn't matter that that tutorial might not be about video games. It's still just creating an image, and you know, you can learn a lot of stuff from a lot of different places. So don't use this tutorial series as your only place or your only resource for learning how to use GIMP. There's a lot of possibilities you can do with GIMP, and I'm just going to show you a couple of tricks that I use in video games and show you some examples. And I'm really going to focus on the video game aspect of creating these images, but you can create all sorts of images inside of GIMP. You can create a digital painting, or you can touch up, like, you know, if you take a picture of yourself and before you upload it to Facebook, you want to edit out a pimple on your face. You can use GIMP for that as well. The possibilities are really endless, but for these tutorials, I'm really going to gear them towards video games, and I'm really going to focus about the video game aspect of all of this. So yeah, in our next episode, we're going to get into UV mapping, which the way I describe UV mapping is it's kind of like the origami of 3D modeling, and you'll see what I mean in the next episode. So yeah, there we go. This has been a long tutorial, but hopefully it's been helpful. Feel free to play around and destroy stuff or create stuff, and just practice, practice, practice. It's art, just like 3D modeling. So yeah, I'm going to leave you with that, and until my next episode, I will see you later, and keep making games.